Yeah, Vern is doing the can't stay till 10:30, and it's like, right. Guys, like half the stuff we're talking about is like
so it really will let people know
the other.
what's
It's like
that planning
still touch on
the letter judge,
I know staff time.
Right. No, it's amazing.
You should get some glasses on.
It'll be interesting.
I never really realized how much
Right. That's exactly
work they do. And
that's that was.
Yeah, and got a very small
That came out the other day.
I can't read it in front of me.
capability doing
A bunch of really.
no problem.
Right. But if you're gonna have
Makes a lot of sense.
area off of trickling water.
or the water district. I will say it's
I wonder, yeah.
sort of assuming they could convince the board deal with that.
I would think so, yeah, you're right.
I was there, one or two of them, I thought, oh shit.
Thank you.
I have to remember which one it is in the special.
But not that one.
So,
Plenty of work. Blow my bag down there.
They're all gonna be done like. I'm deciding whether I wanna pick up something for the summer.
Yeah.
Like when I became chair, like the first.
I got here early, I got to try the e-bike.
Oh, wow.
I know, that was kinda like that twice with, it was Bob.
Let's see what's smelling.
Spring? Yeah.
Or Matthew behind me. Maybe Matthew did something. Maybe he was on bunny ears. Maybe he was on, he did bunny ears, that's what it was for.
What's that?
I actually enjoy it.
I like Warren too, but this one. Because they always throw it.
Yeah.
We're all at same time.
Fun.
Right again, 4, 7, 12.
Nice.
11 towns.
Celebrate all the sober room or take it personal.
The sunshine.
I know, it seems like there's, I got so much room usually.
I know. I count.
Any members or something?
Yeah, we're good.
Certainly you can
There's
get a
Dave.
bigger table.
Milton. Where's Milton? Milton's usually over here. Oh, there he is, down there. Okay.
How are you?
Oh, that's it. They shifted.
I said no.
I'll wait for my corner. Dinner and drinks.
I know, you missed one meeting and people, everybody's moved except me.
Whoa.
This is really.
Call the March meeting of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission to order. First item on the agenda are any changes to the agenda? Are there any changes? Hearing none. Is there any public comment with respect to items that are not on the agenda? Any members of the public who wish to address matters that are not going to be handled elsewhere in the agenda? Hearing none. Next item is action on consent agenda. Is there anybody who wishes to pull any of these items off of the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Next item is approval of the minutes from our February 20, 2019 meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second?
Are there any questions, comments, et cetera? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And any abstentions?
Are you allowed to?
Yeah. Don and Irene, yep.
All right, next item are proposed transit system changes in Green Mountain Transportation with John Moore, Director of Transportation. And
Good evening. So thanks for the invitation tonight. I'm John Moore from Green Mountain Transit, Director of Transportation, and Rachel Kennedy, our Senior Transit Planner, who's done a lot of the technical work on this project, is also with us. So tonight, just want to go over some proposed changes that we're going to be bringing out to a public process starting in the next couple weeks. A lot of folks in this room have probably seen some iteration of this presentation before, and we'll get into some of the slides here. You got time?
It'll take a little while.
Is there a function key I have to hit?
I shouldn't have touched the remote. You're a techie person.
Source.
Yeah, I know. If I'm trying to do it,
It's
we're
source.
in trouble. Every once in a while that works. Sorry.
I assume.
Makes for great television, doesn't it?
You can't actually like scroll through that screen once I get to there. It's doing that on its own.
My 11-year-old will figure this out in about 3 seconds.
Yeah. What were you gonna tell us, John?
Well, we can free float if we need to.
I'm not sure. Everything's all connected.
Well, if we need to, we can do without the PowerPoint. I can email it out. So we'll do without the PowerPoint presentation. I will email it to Charlie and his team after this meeting, so you folks have documentation. But essentially, what we are, oh, we have something?
To drag your window into that, if that makes sense.
Oh, there you go. We're getting there.
Ta-da.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
It is wonderful.
Thank you, Rachel. So there we go. So we've been in this process for a couple of years now. We've called it our next gen plan, so essentially some service changes. Green Mountain Transit operates in a 5-county service area, so we are touching all of our routes in some way, in some fashion. Tonight we'll focus on the Chittenden County routes. And then we'll also get into some of the assessment impacts for the member municipalities, which a lot of the towns you folks represent are members of Green Mountain Transit, and then talk about a proposed fare increase that we're discussing along with the service changes. Some exciting passenger-facing technology improvements we're looking to make, hopefully in conjunction with some of these changes, and then kind of next steps, how we're going to get to achieving these, all these projects. So just a quick overview of the next gen plan. We did hire Nelson Nygaard to do the initial study. They went through and looked at all 50 of the routes we operate in our 5-county service area. They looked at the service we're providing now. They developed some initial recommendations, how we could do things better. They went through and did a very in-depth market analysis, looking at areas that were providing maybe too much transit based on the demand, and then other areas where there's probably more demand than the supply we're providing in terms of transit services. So then they developed the initial recommendation for implementation. We've done some internal work since then, and a lot of stakeholder outreach and some other just general public outreach, and have modified the plan based on some of that feedback and some of our budgetary realities that we're facing right now as an organization. But again, the goal is to attract new riders. We want to maximize the public investment in transit. In Chittenden County alone, there's about a $3 million local investment from the communities, so it's a sizable chunk of change, and we want to make sure we're providing the best benefit to the communities and to the funding partners, and then ultimately the riders. So the plan was phased in 3 different kind of segments. Phase 1 is what we're focusing on right now. That was a cost-neutral scenario, looking at ways to take existing resources and then reallocate them the best we can to get the most effective outcomes in terms of ridership. The plan also does include a Phase 2 and a Phase 3. Those are future kind of expansions based on funding availability and other factors. In terms of a timeline, as you can see, we started this back in September 2017, and really before that. We had an advisory committee that kind of guided the process. Peter and Elena from the RPC were on that, so they provided a lot of great regional input. So right now, as I mentioned, we're getting into the public comment period, and then after that, the plan implementation, which we're have a goal of June 17th to make the changes. So I'll go over kind of a summary of the changes, and then I'd love to leave some time for specific questions on individual communities or routes. But one of our primary goals, and something that the consultant identified, and as staff we've kind of identified through the years, if you look at one of our schedules, it can be confusing, and it's certainly a barrier to ridership. If somebody picks up a schedule and they can't figure out where to be and when to be there, they're not going to try taking the bus. So one of our primary goals is to make our service more passenger-friendly. We want to simplify our service, make it more consistent in terms of the schedules, and ultimately make it an easier-to-use system for current riders, but also new passengers. So we're hoping to do that in a couple different ways, from a scheduling perspective and then also from a routing perspective. So in terms of scheduling changes, one thing we're looking at doing is the 4 kind of main corridors into Burlington, Williston Road, Route 15, Shelburne Road, and North Avenue. We want to kind of target our investment on those routes. We think that's where the highest demand is in terms of transit ridership. Obviously, high density travel corridors. So for those 4 routes, we're looking at providing 20-minute service all day long from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. So that's an improvement for the most part. Whenever you do a cost neutral scenario, there are trade-offs. So we do operate right now 15-minute rush hour service on some of those routes. So there actually would be a decrease in frequency, but based on load profiles in terms of ridership, and then kind of what our peaks are, we think smoothing that out to 20 minutes makes a lot of sense from a passenger perspective. It also allows us to be much more efficient with how we schedule our drivers. That's our number one cost kind of factor, is our labor costs. So part of this process is a goal of efficiency. We'll see this a little bit later, but we're actually providing more service hours to the public with less driver pay hours. So, and we're doing that through a variety of ways. But one of the ways, the major ways, is to provide more of a consistent service structure so we can efficiently schedule that with our drivers. The other routes would operate every 30 minutes. And one thing I'll point out, the number 5 Pine Street route currently operates 15 minutes during the rush hour. I have not seen the ridership to support that, so that's why we're proposing to decrease some of those frequencies. Another big improvement we're looking at making is providing better evening service. Right now, most of our routes end service between 8 and 9:30. On Saturdays, most of our routes are done running by 7:15, so it doesn't lend itself to folks working kind of non-traditional work shifts. If you want to go downtown, grab a bite to eat, you can't really take advantage of our service. So that's one area that we've identified through onboard surveys, and we do a kind of a regional non-passenger survey. People want later service. They want to take advantage of that. So we're proposing to provide late night service Monday through Saturday until 11 p.m. on those 4 major routes. And then also on a Riverside-Winooski route, which travels into Winooski, and a new waterfront airport route that we'll talk about in more detail in a few minutes. Kind of along those lines, we're looking at improving our Sunday service. Again, another area that we're kind of lacking in our service quality. In the city of Burlington, right now, there's it's called Sunday service. It's our Route 18. It's basically a combination of 4 or 5 routes. Doesn't really serve anyone particularly well. It's very convoluted, very indirect service. So we're looking at providing, the same service we provide on weekdays, on Sundays. So the Williston and the Essex Junction routes, we do provide Sunday service now every 75 minutes, not overly convenient for folks that want to take advantage. So we're going to cut that in about half. Those 2 routes would operate every 45 minutes. We think, that's going to lend itself to more people taking the bus. And then these other routes listed, the Pine Street, the North Avenue, and that new waterfront airport in the City Loop will run dedicated Sunday service, which I think will be a great improvement and should help increase ridership. With this, we're looking at all of our commuter routes. Rachel is going through. We have an online survey right now. So not looking to add or subtract any of the commuter service, but looking at possibly adjusting the times based on travel demands. Some of our initial thoughts that some of our link services, especially up to St. Albans and down to Middlebury, they depart Burlington too late in the afternoon. We're not capturing that travel demand. So we're looking at adjusting those times. And then the other big thing for the scheduling is improved on-time performance. For folks, anyone really, but anyone that is a choice rider that has a car at home, they want to try transit. If they get to the bus stop and the bus is 12 minutes late, they're probably not going to take the bus again. So we've realized that, and we really want to, through this process, provide better and more reliable service. So through the scheduling of these new trips, we'll accomplish that. So in terms of some routing changes, one thing we'll spend a few minutes talking more about, but we're looking at increasing our interlining of routes. Essentially what that means is taking two routes, combining them into one. It does a few things, but probably from a passenger perspective, the main thing is it reduces the transfers. So right now, if you live in Essex and you want to get up to Shelburne Road, you have to take two buses, and hopefully they're on time and you can make the connection. Under this scenario, it would be one bus from Essex all the way out to Shelburne, and we have some more examples of that. So some other driver scheduling efficiencies, which is key to the cost containment, but from a passenger perspective, a big improvement in service there. Another big benefit we're proposing to provide is direct service from the airport to the hospital and then to downtown Burlington. Right now, to get from the airport downtown, you have to take two buses, and it's not overly convenient. So that's something that we've heard a lot about, making that direct connection. So again, knowing that we're doing this in a cost-neutral manner, there's some trade-offs to afford some of these improvements. So these items listed in red are some of the eliminations we're proposing. So we currently operate the Williston Village service, which operates 5 round trips from Burlington out to Williston Village. For the most part, very minimal ridership. I think our last analysis out in the village, it's 3 or 4 people a day that take advantage of those 5 trips. So from our market analysis, just not the demand out there to support those transit services. Also looking at eliminating the Sandhill portion and River Road segment out in the town of Essex. One thing I'll note about, 2 things I'll note about that item. Number one, we presented to the Essex Town Select Board and the Essex Junction Village trustees. They both expressed some concerns with that. And we've also, since this study started, have contracted with the Essex Westford School District. So they're now paying for rides for students. So this route's actually up 60% over last year. So we may have to make some adjustments to our plans based on that increase in ridership. It may be counterproductive to eliminate a route with such a high ridership increase. So we're working through some of those issues. And again, the feedback we receive from meetings like this will definitely play into what the final product looks like. So a minor routing change proposed for the City Loop in Burlington. Primarily to improve the on-time performance. Right now, this bus travels on South Prospect Street, southbound to Cliff. We're proposing to route it down Maple Street. We've proposed that and gone through a public process 2 or 3 times in the past. We've met enough public opposition where we haven't followed through with that, but we may try that again. And then a minor routing change in the old North End where we would actually use Champlain Street to travel from Pearl to North Street. So that area we're cutting is very walkable. There's the North Avenue route would still provide good service, so we think that's a logical change. And then in South Burlington, fairly large routing modification. We'll be combining the number 12, which provides service to the airport and the U-Mall now, with the College Street Shuttle. But to do that, we're proposing to eliminate service on Heinsberg Road. But we will have service on Kennedy Drive and Williston, so both ends. We feel that based on the ridership, it's walkable enough that folks will still have access to high-quality transit. So as I mentioned, one of the big improvements we're looking at making is interlining. Again, combining 2 routes into one, reduce the number of passenger transfers required. It also will allow us, hopefully, to make wayfinding more simplistic. Right now, if somebody gets on a bus at the downtown transit center, they might get on the Essex Junction route, which is the number 2 route, which travels on Route 15 and leaves from spot C. So for our customer service folks to explain that can get a little confusing. Through this process, we're hoping to move to a color-coded system. So if somebody says, how do we get to the Essex Junction, we say, hop on the red line. So again, that theme of making things simpler and easier to understand, we think this provides a lot of benefit. So this is just an example of what the new schedules would look like. So essentially what this is the red line, the combination of the North Avenue and the Williston route. So again, every time a North Avenue bus leaves Northgate inbound to the transit center, that bus will always continue out to Taft's Corners and Williston. So for those folks that are traveling between Williston and North Avenue, they'll still travel through the transit center, but they'll stay on the same bus, again, trying to make it as user-friendly as possible. So the schedules we're still kind of working on. There's obviously more information because there's kind of 2 routes built into one, but we want to portray this, again, as easy to understand as possible. So this is another piece that the consultant identified, and something that we've kind of known for a little while, is that for folks to be able to understand the system, they need, consumable documentation. So Rachel has spent a lot of time with the proposed changes, but also with our current service, and trying to develop a system map, which is kind of the most basic, fundamental piece of information somebody needs to take transit. So Rachel has spent a lot of time on this, very clean, easy to understand. And again, by the interlining, so combining two routes into one, there's less colors on the map, and again, a little easier to understand in terms of, just the amount of information that needs to be consumed. Again, this is just the inset of downtown Burlington, but compared to what we offer now, much easier to understand for folks who are trying to just get, downtown circulation. So this is the current service diagram. Again, we have posted this at our transit center, big improvement to some past documentation that we provided. But just to point out the main service geographic eliminations. So in the top right, the number 4, that light colored blue. So we're proposing to eliminate any service east of the Essex outlets. And then again, just below that, the other kind of light colored blue, the 1V, that complete loop, which is Williston Village and Mountain View Road, would be eliminated. But I don't think it's a surprise that they're kind of on the outer edges of our service area, much lower density, and we found they just can't support transit service.
So John, when you say eliminating, like in the upper right, any service out there east of the Essex Center, does that include the Jeffersonville commuter?
No, that would continue to operate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just the number 4 would be essentially truncated at the outlets. And again, that one we're still working creatively to try to maintain as much of that service as we can, but the proposal to date does have it being eliminated. So I guess this might be a good time. We'll get into some other changes we're looking at, but if there's any routing or scheduling questions, I'd be happy, or feedback, be happy to try to answer those the best I can. If not, we can continue on.
Are people able to be tracking the bus so they know when it's gonna be late?
Yes, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but that's an improvement we're looking at making. One other note that is not included in that information, Global Foundries in Essex right now is served by the number 2 route. That would actually be served by the number 10, the new number 10 route. So we'd maintain service, but folks would have to transfer if they were traveling from downtown Burlington. So another routing thing I'll point out, I'll go to the proposed diagram. So the purple line, which goes out to the airport, as I mentioned, we currently offer service from the airport on a number 12 route. But to get to downtown Burlington, you have to take that bus to the University Mall and transfer it to the inbound Williston bus. So what we're proposing here is taking the College Street Shuttle, which operates from the Echo Center on the waterfront to the hospital and then back down to the waterfront. We're proposing to actually extend that route out to the airport. So there would be a 1-seat connection from downtown Burlington out to the airport via the hospital. We hit most of the major hotels on Wilson Road, and then within walking distance to the most of the hotels in downtown Burlington. So I think that's a big benefit. One of the trade-offs there is we would reduce service on the College Street section from every 15 minutes now to every 30 minutes. Oh, thank you. Every 30 minutes under the proposal. But we would then be offering 20-minute service all day long, as I mentioned, on Pearl Street and then on Main Street. So we think that shifting those resources to those corridor routes probably makes more sense than a kind of a downtown route with a very short span of service.
Question for you on the airport loop. It seems like, if I remember correctly, and I probably don't, Tilly Drive was serviced by the airport route, and there was a big push to get bus service for that. What's happening with all that medical office out there?
Sure. So Tilly Drive, I'm sure most people will understand, but off Community Drive in this area. So we've actually never provided service to Tilly Drive directly. We do have an agreement with SSTA, RPCs involved with that. So it's essentially a demand response service that folks they have to make a reservation, they take our Williston bus downtown out to the mall and they transfer. There have been some conversations that maybe that would still be a demand response, but it would start the DTC to make it more convenient. That was discussed a lot over the past few years, but through this process, and our consultant ran the numbers, and if that route did exist, it would be the lowest ridership route he thought in the country. So there's certainly demand out there, and we recognize that. We're not sure. We don't think the appropriate way is for a full-size bus to provide that service, but we think extending that SSTA service to the training center might be the kind of happy medium there.
John,
Hey,
would you mind going back to your Sunday slide?
which one?
The Sunday schedule slide? You talked about a couple routes that have the 45-minute ridership. Are the rest of the routes listed at a 60-minute or?
Yes, it'd be 60. Yeah. So the two main routes would be every 45, and the rest of the service would operate every 60 minutes.
And the two main routes being both?
The Essex and the Williston. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
On the College Street Shuttle, you said that's going to go out to the airport?
Correct.
Is it still going to be a free shuttle, or is there a cost now?
So that's actually on the next slide. That's a conversation that we've started with the City of Burlington. We'll continue with the City of South Burlington, but we'll get into some of those details. It's a good question. Any other routing or schedule-based questions? Great. So we'll get into some of the financial impacts, and then the College Street Shuttle is included in this. I apologize, this is a pretty wordy slide, but so one thing that we're presenting to the public, and then also all these stakeholder meetings, and we've started doing this with all the member municipality, town, and city staffs. One thing that we need to be aware of is that currently, per the GMT charter, any change of service hours of more than 10 in a week, that's increase or decrease, would trigger a impact to the member town's assessment. So essentially what that does is two things. Number one, it kind of protects the town that, if Essex is providing $250,000, we can't say we're cutting half your service and charging you the same amount. So that's a logical and a very valuable kind of protection. The other thing it does, it really minimizes how we can plan regionally and as a system. The Essex Junction route, for example, passes through 3 communities, so it doesn't stop at town boundaries. So this 10-hour rule really limits our ability to make system-wide changes. So one thing that we've discussed with our board, and they're considering, and there is precedent for this, it was done in 2007 when the link service started, that they would essentially freeze this one part of the charter. So we would make these changes, and there would be no assessment impacts in FY20. And then what we would do, and our board would do for FY21, they would look at the actual changes that were implemented, and then they would rebalance the assessments, and that may be on direct service hours provided or some other formula that they would come up with in terms of population demographics or other metrics. But it's really critical for us to make these changes, that we have that flexibility, that we can look at these improvements as a system-wide and a regional level, not on a town-by-town level. So there's certainly been some concerns with that from the town level, so we'll be working through those concerns and trying to find a compromise there. One thing I will say, as I mentioned, the driver pay hours, which is our cost basis of what we pay our drivers, how many hours, through this proposal, those are projected to decrease by 48 weekly hours, but the revenue hours we provide to the public would actually increase by about 110 hours. So again, just really speaks to the efficiency that this will allow us to achieve through our driver scheduling. It also reduces our rolling stock requirements, so we're going to save some money on the number of buses we need in our fleet. And it would also help us to keep our bus fleet newer, which obviously has lower operating costs and maintenance costs. So from a sustainability perspective, that's critical through this process.
Excuse me, going back to the earlier point, do you know which communities would be having at least a 10-hour reduction that would require a change in assessment eventually?
Sure, so, again, it's a wide variety, but Essex was a community, so right now, assuming there's no service put back on that Sand Hill portion, they're losing about 25 hours a week in service. Milton's losing about 11 hours. And Williston will be losing 11 hours. So there's a few communities that are at that 10-hour kind of threshold, Essex being the highest, the biggest change in service under this. One thing I will caution is even for Essex, for the example, even though these service hours are being decreased, we're actually adding number of trips in Essex. But, you know, there's certainly a concern that, you know, they're potentially receiving less service at the same price. So again, we'll be working closely with Essex and other communities to work through that piece of it. But again, our primary goal is to look at this as a regional system. And, you know, even in the Essex case, while there may be some reduction in service hours in Essex, you know, there's a lot of Essex residents that transfer to other routes. They'll have, you know, benefits there from other improvements. So
is that one of the things you're looking for? Because if in the second year you adjust the assessments based on, you know, the service level, then the communities who have less service, that'll reduce, but it will increase everybody else's, I would think. So, I mean, I could see where that would be an issue for some communities that have the same level of service, but their assessment goes up.
right. Well, so in that example, if any assessments went up, the communities would have received more service, but there would still be a situation where the community may say, well, we didn't ask for more service, and we don't want our assessment to increase. So again, very initial conversations at our board level, and we want to make sure that we understand that there's you know, local budgets that, you know, play into this. So I don't have the exact answer what will end up in 21, but we'll work as hard as we can to make sure everyone's in agreement with the funding
I guess I would
structure.
just caution caution about that if some decrease, communities that are seeing no change in service can't be increased.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the things, the rebalancing may not be based on actual service provided, but maybe another, like in a rural area, we base our contributions on essentially demographics, population demographics. So again, that's definitely a critical step that we'll have to take to make sure there's equity involved. So it's a very valid question. So in terms of the College Street Shuttle, so right now that is a fare-free service. Per our charter, any fare-free service, the community has to pay for the foregone fares. So the city of Burlington right now pays roughly $125,000. That, you know, fluctuates based on actual ridership. So because this route is proposed to be extended into South Burlington, one of the things that needs to be determined is if that route will operate completely fare-free, or if the whole route will have a fare, or potentially, you know, it'll be fare-free for anybody boarding in Burlington, but if you get on in South Burlington, you have to pay a fare. There'd be some operational challenges for us if we went that way, but we could probably make it work. So we had a staff meeting with the City of Burlington department heads last week. We're doing the same with the city of South Burlington next week. So again, from a financial impact, there's really none to us, because if it is fare-free, those communities would pay the foregone fares. But that is a conversation that will be happening in the next couple of weeks. If GMT, you know, had a say, I think we'd probably think it would make the most sense to make it a fair service for the entire length of the route. But again, that's going to be determined on conversations with Burlington and South Burlington. In terms of a fare increase, again, as I mentioned, we have some budgetary challenges at this time, kind of, that we're using this as a tool to help with. But we are proposing a cash fare increase. The last time we increased cash fares was 2005. Peter did a quick calculation, which was very helpful. So we're essentially proposing a 20% fare increase on the cash fares. And the inflation rate since 2005 is about 28%. So based on that and doing a peer analysis with some other like-sized transit agencies, going from the current $1.25 to $1.50 seems appropriate. Again, this is all part of our public process. If there's a lot of negative feedback, it'll be up to our board to consider that, and then we'll base our staff recommendation on that feedback. One thing that we are proposing to mitigate that increase in the cash fare is to actually reduce the price of our monthly pass. So right now, that's $50 a month. To try to incentivize folks to use that monthly pass, we're proposing to knock that down to $40. Other benefits associated with that, there's quicker boarding time, so it helps our on-time performance, less wear and tear in our fare boxes, less cash we have to count. So there are some other kind of marginal cost savings along with that. So we're projecting about $160,000 in additional fare revenue generated from this proposal. That's a fairly conservative number. That's assuming there was no increases in ridership. With these service changes, we think we'll see anywhere between a 5 to 7% increase in ridership, which would translate to the fares as well.
Can I ask you a question on the monthly? What's the rationale? Because it seems, to me, on the surface, it doesn't seem logical unless your monthly passes are way down, you're trying to get them up. Because if you increase the fare 25 cents, that makes the monthly pass that much more attractive. So what's the rationale for dropping it $10?
So we actually increased the monthly passes by $15, and this was probably 2012, 2013. And, through some of our surveys, we kind of penalize our high volume customer. And part of the reason for that is, some of the populations, the disadvantaged populations, they can't afford $40 for a monthly pass. And so, we understand that, and there's an analysis that will kind of go into that. But I guess the main reason is trying to mitigate and try to incentivize people going to that monthly pass. So
it's really to increase the number of monthly passes that you
yeah.
How can people buy monthly passes?
So right now, it's fairly limited. We'll get into some technology improvements that will hopefully help that. So right now, you can go to the transit center, or you can order it online, essentially. Yeah, we have a few ticket outlets scattered through our system, People's United Bank, but it's pretty limited, which is something that we want to improve upon.
Will there be changes to any of the price for any of the commuter routes?
At this time, no. We're not proposing any commuter price increases. We have a lot on our plate kind of getting through this process. We will reanalyze our financial needs, and there may be a proposal, the next 12 to 18 months for a commuter increase. So, yeah, well, and, I think one thing we've identified with low fuel prices right now, and there's another factor that goes into this that was part of our analysis. The Federal Transit Administration provides a STIC program, which is a Small Transit Intensive City bonus program. So essentially, there's 5 factors which roughly pay $200,000 apiece. And essentially what it does is it takes the average of larger systems between over 1 million in population. And if small urban agencies like ourselves, if we meet those thresholds, we get 200,000 per metric. So historically, we've received 4 of those metrics. We actually just lost one. Even if we were to increase the fare on the link routes and generate, say, 100,000, but we lost another 200,000 in bonus money, it doesn't make financial sense. So we want to make sure there's no negative implications from that.
I was more interested if it was going to make it more attractive to people who are taking that route every day.
Sure.
In terms of actually reducing the cost of a monthly pass.
Yeah. So no plans to reduce it or increase it at this time. So, one thing we've heard a lot about from stakeholders and some of our surveying is our customer-facing technology. It's kind of commonplace now in the transit environment, even smaller agencies like ourselves that have high-quality technology offerings. We do currently have a AVL system, which is automatic vehicle locating system, through Route Match is the vendor, and their app is Route Shout. If anyone has tried to use that app, they've probably had varying degrees of success with it. We have not been satisfied with them as a vendor. Their bread and butter historically has been more on the paratransit side, and they're fairly new to the fixed route technology. So we are replacing Route Shout. We will probably phase out of that by June 30th of this year. And then at the same time, the state of Vermont has recently procured Swiftly, which is another AVL vending company. We've actually installed all their GPS trackers as of yesterday in all of our urban buses. So we think that it's going to be a much more user-friendly app in terms of the actual app usage, but also the data consumption should be much more reliable. So it should be operating at a much higher level. Another benefit is for the route match hardware, there's a lot of driver interaction. There's a lot of things the driver needs to do to log into the system. Swiftly is just a GPS onboard tracker. The driver turns the bus on and they're done. So there's anytime there's less manual input, it's probably a more reliable system. So we're excited about that. The other big benefit is that it's open source data. So other third-party app developers can come in, consume the data, and it is compatible with Google Maps. So that'll be a big benefit. Swiftly has contracted with Transit is the name of the app. It's an industry leader. We've received a lot of positive feedback on the app from other agencies that use it and from VTrans, their due diligence. So I think the functionality will be greatly improved, and then the user kind of side of the app will be much better. And we are also looking at, to the question on where you can buy a pass, mobile ticketing. This is real-time ticket purchases on your smartphone through a credit card purchase. In 2019, when people aren't carrying cash or change, this is a real convenience factor. So this is the Swiftly app, little sleeker, I guess, in a nicer design than the Route Shout app, even when it is working. This is Santa Monica, California, but they have Swiftly in this app. If you look on the left-hand screenshot in the left-hand corner, there's that bypass option. So the way this would work, and we're hoping to implement this with the June changes. We're just kind of in the early stages, but it's pretty quick technology to roll out. So if you were to hit that bypass, this middle screen would come up. It would have all of our fare offerings, so you could buy anywhere from a single ride all the way up to a monthly pass. And then once you purchase that, we would set a time that pass is eligible. It seems like 20 to 30 minutes is kind of the range that's used. And then what you would do when you boarded the bus, this third screen on the right would show up on your phone, and you would just show this to the driver. And there is some fraud protection. So number one, there's the time. So if you're boarding the bus at 4 in the afternoon and it shows 8 in the morning, that's a giveaway. There's something wrong. And then the word sunset, you can customize that word, but that's scrolling. So you can't take a screenshot of this and kind of try to skirt the system. So we think this is going to be a big benefit, both on the vehicle locating and finding out when your bus is coming, but also we've heard for many years that buying a pass or having correct change is a challenge. So this will correct that for anyone that's got a smartphone. So we're really excited about this program. And again, so for the mobile ticketing, it can consume any of our current fare structures, and then it also will give us the ability, if there's a conference in town, for example, we can shoot a pass to folks' email or to their phone through text, and they can use that. So a lot of flexibility with the system.
Are paper passes or plastic, physical passes still going to be offered?
Yes, yeah, we'll still offer our current fare offerings. I think as we go into the future, more and more people will transition to this just for the convenience factor, but the Federal Transit Administration requires us to continue offering the cash fares, and we would continue the plastic passes as well. So in terms of next steps, right now we're doing a pretty aggressive outreach for municipal staff and stakeholder meetings like this. Starting next week, we'll start our public hearings. I think we have 7 or 8 of them in all of our member communities. And then what we'll do is we'll take all the feedback we receive from the municipalities and the stakeholders and the public. We'll modify this plan from a staff perspective as needed. We'll then present that to the GMT Board of Commissioners on April 16th. And then assuming that they approve it or approve it with other changes, those would go into effect on June 17th, which is our next schedule. So that is, in a nutshell, a lot of information, but in a nutshell is our plan and our timeline. And again, if there's any other questions or comments, I'd love to hear them.
Any questions? Yes?
I was curious that you said you did have conversations with Essex, was it the school board or the select board, about the paying for student fares
So we entered into an agreement with the school district at the start of this school year. So there's been some busing challenges in Essex. They face some similar challenges that we do in terms of a shortage of commercial drivers in the state of Vermont. So that number 4, which currently provides service on Sand Hill, any high school or middle school students rides fare free, and then we bill the school district directly for those rides.
And does that happen in Burlington as well?
Yep.
So are those the only 2 districts that you're, or school districts?
No, we partner with South Burlington as well, so they have the same. They provide school bus service in South Burlington, but we supplement that, and students can ride fare free. So it's a good program.
Anything further?
I guess, John, just let us know if we can help with getting the word
Absolutely.
out at all.
Sure.
I think we got a newsletter going out in the next day or 2, if I
Yeah.
can get the list of public
Take
meetings.
note,
and-
Rachel.
Yeah,
We'll get that information to you.
yeah,
Super.
great.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
Thank you, John. That was very informative. Next item on our agenda is the capital program prioritization. I take it Laney will do this? Christine will do this.
Yes.
Excellent.
Just a country mouse. It's just sensitive. I know, right? What do I not see it on the screen? Can you help make that happen? Why is it not on the screen?
You clicked on that again? Yeah.
Yeah, they did some dragging thing.
Yeah, trying to drag that.
Drag it.
Which one is yours?
Mine is, it's this one.
And it must be open?
It's open.
Which one, this one? Yeah. So,
Gets you every time.
I still miss the days of the non-system disk error. Right, eject the floppy disk and then turn it on again.
is this yours? Yeah.
I used to have a coworker. I was like,
Yes.
Okay, so
Okay, you got it.
now it's working.
All right. Nice challenges.
This says 2016. Is that just a date error, or are we using a presentation from? I just want to make sure I.
Well, March 20 is the,
It's 2016, people. We've taken a way back.
oh, great. It's election season.
Did we get a do-over on that?
I'm pretty sure this is current, so. I know, it says 2021, so.
And it says March 20, so.
March 20, so, you know, it's partly right. Okay, so we're talking about project prioritization. I think probably most people have been through this before, have seen this presentation, so we'll just do a little bit of a refresh and then we'll go through it somewhat quickly. Why are we doing this? Where does the list come from? So, we're doing, we do this every year because VTrans asked us to do it. The legislature has asked to do that, to score all the projects in the Transportation Capital Program. So the project list is from the Transportation Capital Program. We also have the TIP, as you know, and the lists are essentially the same, but the capital program is what generates this list, and the scores become part of the capital program projects advancing for the legislature to act on. So the scoring, it's a combined scoring with VTrans doing scoring, and then all of the RPCs score the project in each of the region. So overview, I think I said much of this, it's required by the legislature, and we have a methodology. VTrans has a methodology that's largely based on asset condition factors for each of their programs, and then the RPCs were directed by the legislature to consider the functional importance of the facility economically and socially in the region. So the scores combined really give the overall project scores. And is kind of some more specific language from the legislature of what they want us to consider: congestion, mobility, availability of alternate routes, importance to the local, regional, and state economy, social, cultural factors, and then conformance to local and regional plans. So I mentioned before, capital program tip, two documents that are different but similar. The capital program is the Agency of Transportation's budget for the year. It's the projects that they expect to do in that year, the current year, plus the next 4 years. The tip is really a planning document looking at projects that we anticipate to advance, but it's not a budget. It's really a planning document. We'll be talking about that again in the next couple of months. So projects in the capital program, I think we've talked about this before. There's kind of 3 separate lists. There's the front of the book list. This is a picture of the front of the book list. Lists all the projects. You can see a funding schedule going out. This shaded column in the middle is the current year, 4 years, 3 years going out, and gives some past funding history. And these are projects that have money specifically associated with them and are expected to go to construction sometime over the next 4 years. There's 2 other lists of projects, the development and evaluation list we talk about, and these are projects you can see that there's some funding designated for them, kind of very general descriptions, not really a great idea of what the project is. You've got a town name and a project number and a route. So these are just projects that are being developed. Not a lot has been done with them. Last list is the candidate list. Even less information on these. These are projects that exist in VTrans's world, but not really anything's been done with them, and there's no funding schedule predicted for them. So projects are prioritized according to the VTrans categories, their program categories, roadway, and they're set in separate bins, so they're not prioritized across the bins. Roadway, safety and traffic operations, paving, park and ride, state bridge, town highway bridge, and town highway bridge pre-candidates. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we can talk as specifically as you want to about VTrans's methodology, but there's a specific methodology for each of their factors, and then basically based on physical condition, cost per user, momentum, and then the regional priority. So we have a methodology we've been using, yes.
Has there been any change in their assessments to account for the quantity of stormwater from different sections of the state roads that would change the priority of moving a project, of the volume of stormwater coming off certain places, or the opportunities to address stormwater in the scoring?
So there is right now an ongoing process that's been going on for a couple of years to redo the methodology. And that is taking in a number of different factors. And basically where that is going to be next year, for the next 2 years, next year we'll be looking at the new methodology plus this methodology. And they're going to run concurrently for a couple of years, and then we'll transition to the old one. But yeah, so that's where we're trying to get some of the other factors in.
And resilience is part of the new methodology.
So the methodology that we use scores on 6 planning factors, and this is part of the federal legislation. We score projects on a scoring sheet. I'm going to flash it up, but it's also in your packet, where projects are either scored high, medium, low, or no impact. And basically what it looks, if you want to look at these more closely, they're in your packet. And how we do it is we start at the top of the sheet for each category, and we check the box. We find the box that is the highest scoring box that's most relevant. That's the number of points it gets. Many projects could score multiple boxes, but they still just get 1 score for each factor. And then projects also get points if they're in the current tip, if they're either construction, right-of-way, or design in the current tip. So the projects that score well using this methodology Projects that are in growth areas, that's a big factor with it now. We made that change a few years ago. Airports, tourism facilities, projects that are in high crash locations, that's a big scoring factor. Intermodal, linkages, regional connections, and projects with critical need. And also kind of some about corridors with significant congestion.
So Christine, just to clarify, this is using your methodology, not
methodology.
the V-Trans version of the methodology.
Exactly, yep,
Your
yep,
portion of the methodology.
yep. So, the next, there's several sheets in your packet of the way the scores all came out. So how this is done, this is presented to the TAC. So the scoring sheets are sent to all the TAC members for review and comment and modifications if we think it's necessary. And then the TAC reviews this and votes on it, and now it's here. So these have been looked at for those groups. This is the roadway list. Number one project is US 2 Industrial Avenue, Williston. This project's been around for a really long time, and is in, I believe, enterprise planning area, and has a number of other factors. And down from there, the new capacity, we have two new capacity projects, Crescent Connector and Champlain Parkway, and those are scored separate in a separate category. And I keep using the mouse. Traffic operations and safety, this is a large group of projects. Number one is exit 16, and that's also high crash locations. It's national highway system, it's growth center, so all of those factors. And paving, and then 10 highway bridge. Does anybody have questions about any of the specific projects?
So, no, the bike bed projects don't make these?
Bike ped projects are grants, so they're a little bit different. So they kind of have their scoring process before they make it to the capital program. So once they get on, they move on their own schedule. They're awarded money.
I'm thinking specifically of the remaining circ alternative projects that aren't on this list. There's 2 or 3 of them that I, just off the top of my head.
The bike ped or the?
Yeah, there's several. The Mountain View Road, the bikeway from Winooski to Essex. Did those get ranked somewhere else, or are they further down the list?
They are not ranked with this, in this. The mountain, they are not ranked with this. Am I telling the truth? The only one that would potentially be on the list would be Mountain View, because I think that's in the roadway program, but it's not. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question for those, but I think still the bike ped projects are not part of this.
Do they still get, again, thinking about the circ alternative projects, are they still gonna get the funding to keep them moving without being on this list?
That's a good question.
Well, being on this list doesn't mean you're gonna get funding either, so.
Not being on the list is.
So I think, so the way that, so currently, so the reason that I'm not trying to be unhelpful in my answer, but the way that bike ped projects move forward right now, with the exception of the Route 15 path from Lime Kiln to Susie Wilson Road, is through the bike ped program, through a competitive grant process. The circ alternatives, that's a conversation that needs to happen. If those projects are expected to apply to that program in order to get funding, or if there's another way for them to go.
Which other ones are you thinking of, Tim? I'm trying to,
Mountain View, Redmond, and then the.
that's in the roadway program, I do know
Okay,
that.
so she answered that, and then it was noticeably absent, because I thought that was an early phase, the Winooski to Essex Junction path. I thought that was an early phase.
That's the Route 15 she just
So-
mentioned.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
So
what I was thinking
yeah.
of.
Right, so that one's moving forward. So the Lime Kiln to Susie Wilson Road is in design, is in right-of-way right now.
So it's moving forward, even though it's not on the list.
It's in the highway.
Mountain View one is just further down, Redmond is
Yeah.
not on the list.
Christine, I thought phase 1 circ alternatives moved independent of prioritization. That was the agreement.
Correct, yeah.
I'm sorry, Matthew, could you say that a little
There were
more?
phase 1 circ alternatives, they moved forward without prioritization.
And that's what the Route 15 path was, the phase 1. There were some other smaller phase 3 bike ped projects. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but the
Colchester just traded one out for
Right, correct, right.
the roundabout at Bayside Park and Lake Shore. Is an example of a phase 3, what would have been a bike and ped funded project.
It's important, this is not the capital program.
No, it is not.
This is the input that we're able to provide as they're putting together the FY '21
Capital.
capital program. As we're more than a year away.
And so the last, so kind of unique, I'm sorry, this is all in your packet if it's small. So a little bit different from the other pieces is we also do a scoring of town highway bridge pre-candidates. So this is unique to this program where we provide scores for projects, for up to 10 projects that are moving their way in, potentially moving their way into the capital program. So this is a list of our top scoring town highway bridge projects. Number 1 project is Bridge 7 on Bay Road in Shelburne. So these would be sort of the projects that are queuing up to be added to the program.
How do you get onto that list, or move your way into that, because obviously you start there and move on?
Drive over.
So,
All the town highway bridges are on this list. You only see the top number.
All town highway bridges altogether are on there. Okay.
all town highway bridges are scored at least every 2 years.
Okay.
Oh, how many?
And
There's
what,
1,700 statewide.
The reason I'm asking is our select board is thinking that there's a few of them that should start moving up, and so I wanted to be able to convey that info, that they are ranked every year.
yeah, so let me know what those
Okay.
are.
Yeah,
and
I don't know what they are, I just know that there are some.
I think we have because you have, Charlotte has one
We've
on
got one
the,
on the list.
on the list.
Yeah, the Spear Street.
No, they're all on the list.
No,
You're
I'm talking
only
about
seeing the
earlier-
top
No,
side.
I'm talking about the
He's talking about the
People don't
actual.
the
understand
actual list, not
The
the,
actual
not this
list.
list, the one before that.
Right. Yeah, so just, I can let you know, so this table shows the state rank also, which is interesting, or, which is potentially interesting, because they're not gonna, our score is gonna be combined with the state score. So I think the lowest ranked one, is pretty low, so I think they're a ways out.
Just a question, the, kind of what Jim is saying here, as far as scoring of bridges, is this a traditional bridge, a traditional span bridge with abutments and everything, or is this including box culverts? Is Amy, maybe, or you can, a box culvert, it's basically a box culvert would be a structure made of concrete that's just square structure, it's not a bridge that per se that has poured, piers and such, just, you're thinking bridges with I-beams, spans, and everything. I'm talking box culverts. There's a lot of box culverts that are large, so.
Matthew can answer.
It's any structure with a span over 20 feet.
Okay.
So it could be a big box culvert, but it'd have to be over 20 feet.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, just so, if, I'm not sure what Jim's, the town of Charlotte is dealing with, but there are a lot of box culverts out there that need improvement, but it's just over 20 feet, any kind of structure, all right.
Well, there's a lot of local bridges and box culverts less than 20 feet, too.
Right, that's what I'm saying, but I just wanted to get that clear, that's why I'm asked, I want to get
Yeah.
that clarification of what it includes.
Yeah,
in this.
20 foot is the magic number that makes them eligible for federal funds.
And I'm also I'm gonna hand out a table that has, I never keep one for myself, that has the projects that are in the current transportation capital program. There's, the ones that are highlighted in yellow are new to the program this year, so you've got the different programs, paving, Interstate Bridge, State Bridge, roadway, and then the last page are the development and evaluation list and the candidate list. So, just to let you know what's in there. And these are the projects that have money in 2020.
just kind of a background piece.
This is a background
of
piece, just if you're curious.
What's in the existing proposed capital program for FY '20. What we're talking about, asking you to take action on is the scoring, the ranking, that provides input for the FY '21 capital program.
Yeah, maybe my timing is off on that.
No, I think it's just hard to realize, like, V-Trans is gonna be putting together the FY '21 program, like, in the fall. So in the spring, they're asking for RCC into their process.
What did you say about the yellow ones?
Yellow ones are new to the capital program this year. As most of the new ones, all of the new ones, no, not all the new ones, but most of the new ones are paving because those are projects that advance more quickly.
It's also important to note, this reflects what's called the governor's recommended budget. What the legislature spits out could be different than this. That's up to you to work out with them.
I was in the Senate Transportation Committee last week, and there was a conversation about the prioritization process. But I think the notable part of the conversation was how much the senators wanted to make sure there wasn't political games being played with the list, that the data was driving the prioritization, and so I thought that was good to hear. And when I say the senators, I mean Tim Ash and Dick Mazza were very clear on wanting the right projects to move forward and not any politically based project. So, for what that's worth, I did not get the sense that they were going to be making a lot of changes to the priorities that were coming.
So,
I'm sorry?
So are there any further questions? If not, is there a motion to approve the 2021 regional project scores and town highway bridge pre-candidate regional project scores?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Does that motion do what we need it to do? Yep. Okay. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Christine, for that. Next up is the Shelburne Town Plan approval.
So you have in your packet documents about the 2019 Shelburne Town Plan, which has recently been adopted by the select board.
Okay.
It was reviewed by our planning advisory committee back in November for both approval and confirmation of the plan and the relatively new determination of energy compliance process, which we've discussed a few times with this group. There were a few small changes that were identified during the PAC review process that have since been made. You'll see that in the annotated information that's included in your packet. Both the staff review is annotated in there and also discussed in the memo. With those edits, the PAC made a motion to recommend that the plan be approved, the planning process be confirmed, and that they get their affirmative determination of energy compliance. That's also the staff recommendation. So I'm happy to answer any more questions that you may have about the plan.
Any questions, comments? Hearing none, is there a motion for the commission to approve the Shelburne Comprehensive Plan, confirm its planning process, and grant an affirmative determination of energy compliance for the 2019 plan?
So moved.
Second. A second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations, Shelburne.
Where's John?
Next up, going from the sublime to the ridiculous, Act 250 recommendations. No, I'm sorry, I just crept in there, didn't I?
Okay, so as you all recall, at your last meeting, you saw the first set of policy statements on Act 250 proposed changes. So what we're doing tonight is just recommending that you add 2 to that list. We could have done this more efficiently, so I apologize for that. But essentially, number 9 talks about how in the proposed bill, it calls for regional plans to be approved, just as local plans are approved, in order to be used in Act 250 under criteria 10. The Vermont Planners Association have thought about this issue a little bit, and in your memo, you kind of see their description on this issue and why it's in the plan. Staff's recommendation, as well as the ad hoc Act 250 committee, met last Wednesday. Executive committee looked at this just before this meeting. And the recommendation is for number 9 to include that for regional plan approvals, they should be reviewed by a development cabinet or some other similar instrument of the state. The proposed bill has the Natural Resources Board / what they're recommending the Natural Resources Board to be the body that approves regional plans. That feels a little bit like it's not the right organization because that board uses our plan in their regulatory process. So it seems like there should be a different entity doing that. Just to make one clarification for you that just came out of the executive committee before this meeting, for number 9, on the second line at the end, it currently reads, "are reviewed and approved." The recommended change is, "are reviewed for compliance with statutory planning goals." So just being much more clear about what exactly our plan would be reviewed and approved for, as opposed to sort of opening it up for other debate. That's number 9. Number 10 really just follows that up with, if there is an approval process of regional plans, how and by who should those approvals be appealed to? Who should hear the appeals? So that recommendation is the environmental court, and similarly, that local plans appeals would be reviewed that way as well. A little bit of background on that particular one. There is a body in your memo in the 3rd bullet. It describes a regional review panel that has been in statute before and in place to hear appeals of locally approved plans. So here at the Regional Planning Commission, like we just did, we approve local plans, and who should appeal that? Who should get those appeals if somebody didn't like the decision? The regional review panel was set up in statute for that, but it's been repealed in some places, so it doesn't really actually exist at all. So the recommendation here is to give some guidance to that as well for the environmental court to play that role.
Any further questions, comments, discussion? Jim?
Just one, with the repeal of that review board, was that repealed for that reason, or did it happen to be in some other larger law that it got lost because there was a different repeal?
I think it was repealed as part of a broader repeal, and they didn't realize that it was still being referenced with respect to the.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So would another option be to reinstitute that board as well, so that you're not actually going to the environmental court as an option, you know, like one or the other, since it wasn't meant to be eliminated?
Well, no, I think it was meant to be eliminated, but they forgot that by eliminating it, it was also being eliminated for regional plan review.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So, and I think, we've tried to be consistent in our efforts at advocating for efficiency.
Yes.
So the development cabinet or some other, we're trying to have it to be something that's existing.
Right.
So that's.
Well, I misunderstood
Yep.
the first part of the question. So if it was meant to be repealed, then
Yep.
yes. I agree.
Do you remember who
heard appeals from the council or regional commissions when that existed? Because that was the review panel that got repealed.
That would have, under a prior, where, under Rule 75 of the Vermont Rules of Civil Procedure, there is a process that allows you to appeal governmental action that does not otherwise provide a specific appeal route in the legislation. So and there are a number of, one-off type boards or that don't have an act with a specific appeal procedure included. And so the fallback is to file it in what would now be the civil division. So you'd be going to a division of the Vermont Superior Court under the old regime, but now the Superior Court's been split between the civil division and the environmental division. And the proposal here is to send it to the environmental division because they presumably have expertise in this area.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm uncomfortable with environmental court. That's why I was wondering what the old option was, and to be honest.
There's built into our system a right of court review with respect to any quasi-judicial decision by the government. So built into it, and this Rule 75 is sort of the divot filler. So if there isn't a specific provision providing for an appeal to a court, that steps in and provides that process. So for instance, select boards make curb cut decisions, and 1111 doesn't have an appeal process for that. If somebody wants to appeal a curb cut decision, they go to the civil division under Rule 75.
I understand that. I'm just saying I'm uncomfortable with that, in part because in order to go that route, you have to be represented by an attorney, even under that rule. And I'm wondering if there was another option that existed in the past that we could reconstitute. But, again, I don't have the old statutes in front of me, so I don't know what it was.
Any other further questions?
Some of the conversation at the committee was even if they did do that, there would still be, eventually you would get to court.
Yeah, well, and
So
it might have even gone to the Supreme Court, I don't know.
Yeah.
Which I don't know that
So I think the conversation was kind of let's work as much as we can with what we got, yeah.
Because I would assume then appeals from, if they're gonna hear appeals of municipal approvals that RPCs make under the 117 statute, those would go to environmental court too then. And we're comfortable with the environmental judge making the consistency, they're applying the consistency stuff under 4302.
Well, and by having it be a particular court that is better versed in these areas, the hope is that there will be a degree of expertise and consistency that you wouldn't necessarily get if you scattered it around to different places. But that's obviously a dialogue that's going to be taking place over the next 2 years of legislative session.
That's okay. I just wanted to be clear from Jim's initial question, I think referred to the bullet 8 and then, sorry, my screen went to sleep, but the notion that the Natural Resources Board transitioning into the bird or whatever it becomes wasn't the right place to weigh in on an appeal or approval in the first instance of an RPC plan, and then obviously an appeal thereof, you'd have the same concern. So just for everyone else who might not have been in the weeds, really two separate questions. Who approves the regional plans, and is there a judicial appeal route?
And the reason I think that they've gone with a recommendation, and this again comes from the VPA as well, for the development cabinet or some interagency group like that, is twofold. One, our plans deal, there are various agencies that have a lot of interest in a part of our plan, but our plans are by name comprehensive and cover the whole gamut of issues. And secondly, we were a little uncomfortable with having a regulatory body that is going to be using plans and referring to them also being the ones that approves them. So we wanted to keep that process separate, at least that was the thinking. I think that was the thinking of the VPA as well.
Actually, VPA looked at a number, and I think we'd be okay with alternatives too to that, but we looked at the downtown board, the development cabinet. We looked at an affiliated committee that was associated with the resource board, but firewalled from it for some of the reasons you mentioned. And again, the development cabinet was created at a point where the cork was eliminated around the same time in order to kind of fill that gap. So that's why we landed there in making that recommendation.
Anything further? All right, is there a motion to approve these two additions to the RPC's Act 250 position paper?
So moved.
Second.
And just for clarification, it's with the clarification as mentioned by.
Yes.
Yes.
Although with that edit, I would mention consistency with the goals, because that's a statutory term. If it's going back to 40.
Compliance with
and not-
statutory planning goals, yes.
I
So
would
you're
say
suggesting for
consistency.
consistency.
Right, because that's the test in 4302, yeah.
Perfect. I like precision. I think you might not realize that sometimes, but. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you,
And I'll
folks.
abstain again.
All right. Executive Director Report.
So, the first one is just to let you know, the UPWP committee, I think is gonna meet tomorrow for their last meeting.
We are meeting.
We are meeting tomorrow,
Wow.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Tentatively.
So, we're very tight on the quorum, hence
Definitely maybe.
my uncertainty, so, but I think, we have a pretty good draft right now, and so, that should be in front of you at your April board meeting as a draft, and here for action in May. So, heads up on that. There is one last little issue I think the committee will have to work on tomorrow, but, other than that, I think it's pretty much there. Legislative update, I guess I'll just pick up the Act 250 bill conversation. So, the House Natural Resources Committee has not yet actually really turned the working document into a bill. So, you know, I think we're kind of working on this position language in anticipation that that might happen. It clearly isn't gonna move before crossover at this point, I don't think. That would be shocking to see happen this week.
No, it's definitely a 2-year.
And so, so anyway, I think just to prepare you, I think there hopefully will be a bill that at least is in the House by the end of the session this year that will then be taken back up, you know, in January. So we will be revisiting our comments based on what that bill looks like, because there may be something more specific that we want to respond to in a different way. And the other significant bill that has implications for the regional planning commissions is S96, the water quality bill. You may have seen an article, I think maybe in Vermont Digger in the last day or two. The bill is potentially going to do two things. One, it's talking about how to distribute water quality funds to sub-grantees, to implementers of projects. The bill talks about having clean water service providers, I think is the term. And it right now is written to default to the RPCs. The secretary would assign an entity to be the clean water service provider. But there are a couple significant issues in there for the RPCs. The big ones being that it would require the clean water service provider to be responsible for ongoing operations and maintenance of any project that was funded.
So Charlie's bought a new pair of boots and a shovel.
Whatever it takes to maintain. Right, back truck. Bernie needs some work to do after she retired.
You can be the flagger.
And, so, and it also, almost has a little bit of a permit feel because it also has an enforcement provision that, would have DEC take enforcement action against the clean water service provider if they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So, the earlier conversations were more about helping DEC get grant dollars to partners locally and facilitating that administrative work. I don't know if their hearts have been in the right place and they're trying, but their business office has been pretty backed up the last couple of years. And so we were totally fine doing that, but these other pieces in there. So anyway, just if you hear something about, I got an email, I think yesterday, with the phrasing that it would have RPCs monitoring and taking enforcement action on towns. Like that. There's some spins on how this really would work, because how would that work? So there's definitely more conversation there that needs to happen to see how it would work. It is though, I think, getting voted out of the Senate probably this week. So this conversation will get picked up in the House.
Which bill is it?
S-96. The second big piece of the bill is supposed to be raising clean water revenue. My impression is that the Senate is going to ask the House to work on that. So stay tuned. We'll see how all this works. Because, and obviously a lot of it's predicated on there actually being money to distribute to
I think
partners.
the Sergeant at Arms is buying megabucks tickets. That's the current plan.
That might be a temporary fix.
For the Act 250,
Yeah.
I've heard from various people that have done some testimony that they get the feeling that the committee has a clear idea of what they want, and if the comments are coming in that don't align with it, they're kind of just really not paying attention to them much. I just want to know, you got that feel, or you had a different feel from when you were there?
I guess the way I've characterized it's been hard to tell because they're not actually working on a bill that they're editing over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know which pieces they've listened to or not, or who they're listening to, until we actually see a bill. So I'm gonna keep hoping for the best. We'll, plan for the worst. I think depending on what the bill actually looks like, it may require more intense engagement.
I will say that to their credit, I think the committee, and I had the privilege of testifying in front of them last week, not as RPC, but otherwise, that I think they've recognized that this involves a lot more than they realized going into it. And I think they realized pretty quickly that they weren't going to be able to turn this around this year. So they are making an effort to call people in on a number of different issues, but we really won't know until we see an actual markup of a bill beyond the version that the committee had developed over the course of the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I did testify there, I think the day after your last meeting, or when we first voted on those 8. Didn't have a lot of time, but, I felt like they were listening. And so,
Okay.
but we'll see.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay. There are a collection of minutes, letters, and the like in our materials. You can follow up with folks if you have any questions about that. Are there any members' items or other business to be considered? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Assuming no discussion?
Did Jeff tell you to do that?
Want to keep the tradition alive here. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, the ayes have it. Thank you very much, folks. Happy spring.
As we dig out from the snow on Friday.
Jeff said you have to make a motion.
I do it at select board meetings, so.
Oh, okay, all right.
Natural.
So Bernie, I got your message. They need to have their
They're
own
very
call.
used to that seat making that motion.
On the bill, they need to be shown independent of one another.
All right, it'll give you a hard time.
They have to be tracked.
With one item in each, so
I have confidence.
And then perhaps, like, this opposite is one line of it. So maybe.
Here we go, Heinsberg, yeah.
Oh, it's not from Heinsberg. Survey results and UVM has.
Oh, you did? Oh, sorry, I can add you back.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on that S96 plan.
Well, I'm just thinking about for institutional knowledge and what's the clearest
You get a chance?
way to do it, and I'm a little thinking that they want to all intermix.
You wanna meet halfway like
It's
it's
as
Heinsberg?
clear.